I think we're all pretty excited to be here tonight. It's rare to have a meeting of minds like this in person and in London. So thank you, Hans Ulrich, thank you, Harmony, for being here with us tonight. My name is Zoe Sperling. I'm Senior Director here at the Gallery at Hauser Wirth. On behalf of Ivan, Manuela, Mark, and Ewan, thank you very much for being here. We're here to celebrate Harmony's exhibition, Aggressive Drifters 2. And And this is really the second chapter of the exhibition that opened in LA last year and directly relates to your new film, Agrodrift, which debuted at the Venice Film Festival in 2023. Now, a few notes before I start, because these two don't need any introduction, and they've known each other for 30 years, so I think we'll leave it to them. But just in terms of experiencing Agrodrift, there are still tickets available for tomorrow evening at Earth in Hackney, so do look that up. And as we know with Harmony, it's an entire experience, not a traditional film screening, so that is of interest. And then immediately following this, we go into our private view, so please stay and have a celebratory drink. And I think with that, over to you, Hans and Harmony.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this very kind introduction, and thank you all for being here. And before we start, I think we should all give a very big round of applause and a very warm welcome to Harmony Korine. And I wanted to begin actually by also saying how incredibly excited we are that Agnes Bay is with us here tonight, and we should give her a big round of applause. Because it was Agnes who actually introduced Harmony and me almost 30 years ago. It was Agnes and Jonas Mekas, and of course, Harmony, you have collaborated with Agnes for so many years, so maybe we could begin with that, with your many collaborations and your wonderful friendship.
I just want to start by saying, wankers! You're wankers! Oi! Wankers! That's awesome. And you can hear it's all good. Wankers. Agnes, this is Agnes B. She's like the... Agnes is one of the most important people in my life, and she's like helped a lot of, she was kind of like a patron saint to a lot of artists and growing up, and she's very private, so I won't say too much, but she's like, there's no one in the world like her. I probably would not be here. It's safe to say I would not be here without Agnes. She is an icon and a great woman. A French treasure.
And I always remember, Harmony, when Agnes introduced us, it was in Paris, it was in the 90s, and actually, in this very first conversation, you told me about your deep admiration for Buster Keaton. That actually is really the beginning. As a kid, you were super fascinated. Your father took you to see Steamboat Bill Jr., and actually the poetry and the humor, it sort of is the beginning of everything. Can you tell?
Yeah, well, Buster Keaton I just loved him. I still love him, and Steamboat Bill Jr. in particular. I just loved... I think like going back now, yeah, I'd never really seen anything like the poetry of Keaton was really, it was so simple on the surface and kind of violent, but then there was this kind of sadness to it, and it was so expressive. I love Chaplin too, but I always was partial to Keaton coming out of vaudeville, and his godfather was what's his name? The magician, the famous magician. And they called him Buster because they would throw him down the steps, and he would bust his ass. And I wanted to be like Buster. Yeah. Houdini was his cousin, his godfather.
So we talked about Houdini and Buster Keaton, and it was basically Paris in the 90s, and you actually began already then, around 97, to do your first exhibitions, because obviously you're here in an exhibition, and we knew your work at the beginning through Jonas as a filmmaker, but you explained also in these early conversations we had that you were really interested in exhibitions, and you kind of wanted to find a unified aesthetic, an idea which you followed ever since you were a kid. And of course the unified aesthetic has something to do with Charles and Ray Eames. Can you tell us about that? Because that's something which is the case today with video games. It's a unified aesthetic.
I think always I've just always seen everything as one thing. I always just felt like it was all just art, or it was all just entertainment. And I think maybe it was my attention span always has been so destroyed that I just lose patience quickly with one form or the other. And I want to try new things, but I never wanted to. It was never about being the best or the greatest. It was always just about being myself within the context of that medium. And so, like, if I've never seen an opera, but if I saw an opera, I might want to make an opera, but I wouldn't want to make the greatest opera. I would want to just make like the Harmony opera, And so I was like, it's all kind of unified. I would say it was a unified aesthetic. You could reference Charles and Ray Eames in the way that they obviously made furniture, but then they also had lesser known, things that they would do. They would make short films about tops spinning and about little toy trains, and it all kind of spoke to this kind of like one body of work. The ideas that, like, whether it's the writing or the films or the paintings or the games or whatever it is, that it's all comes from like a singular voice. And that was always the most interesting type of career, the career that I wanted.
Thank you so much. And that brings us, of course, right away to today, because that's the case today with this exhibition and with your new film. And we discussed a lot last year when we did this conversation about the film and your Los Angeles show, which is the second chapter here at Hauser Wirth of this new body of work. We discussed a lot about video games, and it's fascinating. I mean, last year, for the first time, more than 3 billion people were actually playing video games in the world, and that's more than a third of the world population. So what used to be a pastime activity for few people has become very much a lead medium of our time. And in a way, for you, it's not new, because video games played a role. I mean, already in 2012, when you did Spring Break, as you told me, it felt somehow like a video game. It was with Spring Breakers really that you started to feel that life was melding with gaming. Can you tell us about that and how that began?
I always played games. I always liked them as a kid, and then over the course of the last couple of years, then having kids and watching gaming aesthetics and people talking about like the creation of like Web3 and or metaverse and all that stuff, and I was like it kind of exists. It exists in Call of Duty. It exists in GTA. It exists like there. It kind of is already there. And then I was watching like the level of gaming and like the kind of like world creation element, and also like the joy that it was giving people. And then you started to see that everything was just starting to become what I would call gamified, or the gamification of like entertainment. And there was this kind of like, it felt like this like singularity this thing was starting to happen where it was all kind of becoming a game. And then even maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, I started to think like, we probably during Spring Breakers era was like, life is starting to feel like that. And then I was asking myself all these questions, and I was like, is any of this even real? And maybe like this is a game. And then I got more and more into it and hang out with game developers and coders and people, and starting to think about whether or not this is even real.
But it's also got to do with the editing style, because you kind of called this editing style a liquid narrative, and it's something which appears in Spring Break, but it also appears in Beach Bum, no?
Yeah, the liquid narrative, believe it or not, I would call it liquid narrative, which is that basically this idea that things never really, there's no continuity. and that things are never really begin and end, and that there's not even really time. So I first started experimenting with the idea of this kind of liquid narrative, believe it or not, in advertising. We're doing advertising, playing with techniques with time and sound and like visual cues, and then kind of like, wow, this is kind of an interesting thing where there's no fixed point. Like in cinema, when you're shooting, traditionally there's marks and there's continuity and things. And then I was kind of like, just more like, I want to just chase the light. Like I want to just go towards the light. And then I started to like give up on continuity, and it was more then about an energy, and like doing the same action here and there and there and there, and then connecting them in a way. So it became like what I would call like just for the easy term, which was just like a liquid, free-form narrative. Even like with the Agro Drift film, it's in some ways we're talking about releasing it in a way where it just never ends, where the film is constantly remixing itself, where there's like different skins for different, performers and actors, and like where it just feels like it's just always going and living and kind of using sequences that weren't actually in the film themselves.
And it's kind of interesting because, as I mentioned, we met with, thanks to Agnes, 30 years ago, and then we worked on the Point d'Ironie together with the Polaroids, and so many collaborations. And then years later, video games brought us together again, and we were both very fascinated by Elden Ring.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time with Elden Ring.
Big Elden's Ring fan.
Yeah.
By the way, it's a very hard game to play. By the way, it's not an easy one.
But you can kind of enter and leave, and it's kind of transgressive. And you told me that you felt that it's transgressive in the way that movies started not to feel. So maybe in a way, what the novel would be to the 19th century, or what the movies would be to the 20th century, could maybe be a video game to our century. Can you talk a little bit about this immersive aspect? And because you started to experiment with actually making shorter clips. Before you did the film,
yeah,
you actually started to make these shorter clips, which were kind of game influenced, no?
Yeah, I have this kind of this company, this crew in Miami that we formed called Edgelord, and it's some of the most creative kids in the world. A lot of them VFX masters and coders and tech and game developers and graphic designers, and it's kind of become closer to what I would call like a design collective, because really what they're doing is designing futurist entertainment, or it's almost as if the brief is is almost as if like there was no past, and we're also creating like a lot of the tech that we're using, like a lot of the creative is informing the tech that we're building to use, and so we are like making we're experimenting with all these different things, but with this film specifically, it was really not even conceived of as a movie. It was more trying to figure out if there was something beyond the kind of movie making and something beyond an articulation or even a logic. There was something that was like post-logic and more immersive, and actually felt like you were in some ways inside of a game or a hallucination, but still within like a two-dimensional realm. No goggles and no Neuralink. It was really like, can we do this like on a screen? So we, as this crew, we kind of developed, we were like, what's out there? Is there something, is there a form? Is there something that like we could play with? And then we developed this language with thermal and VFX and AI, and it's like a kind of layering system.
And it's the first time you do actually a film with Edgelord, but Edgelord is going to do many more things. There is also merchandise, there is objects, there is animatronics, there is films. I think it would be interesting to explain a little bit to everyone here how Edgelord works, because I came to visit you there and I thought it was incredibly fascinating. I mean, there is, of course, Joao Rosa, who is basically plays a very important role in that office. He's the kind of co-founder. and head of production. But then there is, real-time. You introduced me to real-time 3D artists. You introduced me to inventors who kind of build animatronic dolls. You also showed us a whole merchandise section. I mean, it's really a kind of a new type of factory for the 21st century. I think it would be great you describe it a little bit.
That's
it's a unique place, and also the way how you pull talent, and the talent doesn't necessarily all come like from the art world. It's a lot from different worlds.
Yeah, there's almost no art world in it, but they're creating like what I think is some of the most interesting art in the world. And a lot of that will be like released like, in the next, within the next couple of months, we'll start to like put things out. And it's not really just, it's not mine, it's not just a thing that it's mine, that's using a lot of other kids are coming in, like using the technology, and it's really, basically, if you can imagine like a collective, except instead of like other artists and photographers, they're really like just people that work in gaming and work in visual effects and work in Unreal and work in using gaming engines and different, in that world, we'll call it, like the visual world. And so what happened was over the last couple of years, tech became more interesting to me because it started to feel like for the first time, like it was starting to like level, it was starting to coincide with like the level of like my dreams. And that like we could actually make things in the room that like parallel, like not just my dreams, but people's dreams. You could call it world creation, but you could go much further than conventional movies. And then the whole idea of what movies are is even different. Does it even matter anymore? Like, does it matter? Like I see things that are 10 seconds long, 5 seconds long. I've seen things that are, half a minute where someone makes something in Taiwan and puts it online, and I see it and I'm like, it goes beyond anything I've ever created, I think. It's like inexplicable to me. There's like things that I see that like kids are making where it's a 10-second clip, but I'll spend like the entire day just trying to figure it out. Not just understand how it's being made, but understand why it's being made, understand like the regionality, the narrative context or lack of narrative. Sometimes the lack of context is what makes things so interesting, because at 10 seconds there's almost no context, so there's a mystery to it in a way. Whereas movies, there's a tendency to explain everything. There's not magic, and art. A lot of art is that same way. It's become corporatized, and so within those rooms, they're really creating what I think is like going to be some of the most exciting things that come out in the future.
No, I was incredibly excited to experience this and also meet all these, incredible people who work for you there. And one of your young collaborators, when I asked him, what brings it all together, what's the unified element, he said it's all blinks.
Yeah.
And I've been interested in, neologisms, and
Right.
in the book actually with Sean Bazan and Douglas Copeland on that. We kind of need new words for the 21st century. So I was kind of fascinated that your team sort of summarized the activity as blinks. Can you explain that?
It was just a word that we came up with internally to try to describe things that didn't really fit into any box. That were like, can a movie be 12 seconds long? But it's a blink. If you think that, I've always thought almost every time you actually blink your eyes, it's like an edit. You're editing your life with your blink. You're constantly editing. And so we were like, they're blinks. So what they are basically like digital drugs. They're like, some of them are very short and some last a long time, but they're digital injections.
And now
Aesthetic injections.
Agrodrift is basically the film which will be screened tomorrow as part of this happening. We're going to talk about that later. This happening which is going to happen tomorrow night. There's, of course, elements from this film here in the back when you enter, on the screens. This film, Agrodrift, is also the point of departure of the paintings which surround us here. We're immersed in your new paintings, and the whole film, when I saw it, actually last year, the whole film appeared to me to be this kind of infinite painting. There is an infinite number of paintings in it. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of Agrodrift, and particularly also this idea that there was no script? Because obviously you began as a script writer, and for all your early films, script.
I should preface it by saying I have almost no desire to make normal films. So just so we're understanding, I have almost zero desire. I say almost because you never know. I'm not that old, right? But I have. When I look at films and or shows or things, and I just have to listen to people talking, it makes me sick. Like people sitting there talking at a dinner table for a half an hour. I like it. I find it soul crushing. And so as it comes, I've kind of just become more and more interested with image and sound. That's really it. I mean, there is dialogue and stuff, but very stripping things back down to their kind of most base. Closer to sometimes I reference pop music. I was pop music, so I would say, some of the movies are kind of like pop. They feel like a pop song. There's hooks. There's choruses and vocal refrains, and there's different things that come back and repeat, and then there's a kind of there's almost within the films a kind of or the things that we're making a kind of hypnotic sensory effect. So yeah, with this we were how can you be inside of a game? How can I reduce? How it's very reductive. They speak in platitudes. They repeat things. But then what happens if you let the film, it hopefully starts to work on you in a way that there's a physical component to it, where it's a kind of, like I said, beyond articulation and veers into something that is hopefully becomes more, slightly more transcendent.
And there is this text by Venkatesh Rao who basically summarizes the current condition as a condition of unnarratability. I cannot pronounce it in English. Unnarratability, it's almost like the impossibility to narrate. It's a condition which is unnarratable. The unnarratability of the world, says Venkatesh Rao. And when I told you about this text, you talked about time last time we spoke, and you said that it's also got to do, the fact that there isn't a script, it's also got to do with the fact that time has maybe been obliterated. So is the present kind of gone, or can you talk about time?
These are big questions. It's kind of existentialist. This is a moment where you question time and what's real and what's not real, and if time has been obliterated, I kind of am starting to feel like none of it's real, and there is no time. That's just me personally. The more time I spend in the room staring at screens and seeing things, the more I'm starting to feel like this is all, a game. And so I don't think that time exists anymore in that conventional sense. Yes, there's time on your watch, but I think now it's all just one moment.
And when you don't have a script, I suppose a drawing plays a role. And I remember when we met in the 90s with Agnes, you did also an exhibition in Paris, and drawings played always a big role. Can you talk a little bit about that, the kind of role of drawings?
Yeah, I don't really use scripts. I don't really, in the last, I'm almost done with this new one. It's the same thing. I don't really use scripts anymore. I mostly freestyle, like a freestyle rap. I just get on the mic and just make the shit up. I have ideas, and then I have images, so I'll draw the images, or work with a storyboard artist or whatever it is, and then come up with something that's very simple. Usually, draw the images out, and then figure out the medium, figure out the way we're gonna do it, and then basically as it goes, the stories or things start to evolve based on what I leave myself open to the experience of what's happening in the moment. It's a kind of chemical reaction where you have different characters and different people. different images and socioeconomic and this and that, and you stick them in a room together, and then you see where it goes. And then within that, I'm also like, I'm tweaking and directing and then coming up with ideas. So I kind of like create it in the moment, as opposed to, it's funny because I started as a writer. Like that's what I started. I started as just a writer. And writing is still like one of my favorite things to do. Painting, writing are probably, but I love the idea of making things happen in the moment. It's like an action, remember? They're like actions.
Yeah, that's why you call it a rave cinema. It's kind of like a...
Right, I was saying rave cinema. It's like, yeah, they're like raves, actions. It's like documenting the explosion, but like they're narrative but not narrative. It's it's like, I guess they're trying to inhabit their own space and universe.
There's also kind of a floating feeling, if one looks at the film, just looking here at the screen, it sort of floats. It's almost like a Grand Theft Auto kind of environment where one is floating. And of course, there are, protagonists floating. Can you talk about the casting of Agro Drift? Because the Spanish actor Jordi Mola is Bo, is a hitman. And then there is also the rapper Travis Scott, who, of course, has been in gaming by doing concerts in Fortnite.
Travis Scott's in, Travis is a character in Fortnite. He's definitely like in the culture. I play Fortnite a lot. My kids play Fortnite. I just got 20 kills the other day. Acting, there's not many actors. Jordi Mola I live in Miami, and he was my next door neighbor. He was renting the house, and so he would always come in. He would be wearing a bathrobe. It's like that. He would just open the door, and he would just be in my living room. And I think he's a great actor from Spain, and he used to send me these WhatsApp clips of like these lizards like shitting in the backyard, and I thought it was cool, and like 3 or 4 days before I made it, I was just like, "Do you want to star in this thing?" And he was like, "Yes, but I don't want to know what it's about." He was like, "Just tell me when I show up." And I love that type of actor, And so Jordy's in there, and the rest are like really just people like stuntmen and they're gangs and goons and.
You mentioned Haitian gangs.
Haitian, yeah, there's some Haitian gangs and members in there.
Now there is also AI in it, and I kind of want to understand more how AI enters the picture, because obviously weapons are there, but there are also masks. Masks, as often in your film, play a big role, but these are kind of AI-generated masks. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, masks or like avatars are always interesting to me. The whole idea of identity is interesting to me. Image-wise, they're interesting. And with AI, we used AI in a very specific way, in a way that's like I hadn't really seen before. Guys in my rooms really like developed this thing, and it was kind of closer to like shape shifting. We weren't using AI in a way where it was just, we were using prompts to image, and just, it was really, we were incorporating different types of AI into actually like forms. Things that seem, if you see the film, that are kind of constantly shifting and changing. I say it's like the closer to if you're baking a cake and it's the frosting on the cake, and it's something that it's within the cake itself. It's like another layer, it's another tool.
And then, of course, a last point about the film, which then also leads us to the painting, is, of course, the fact that you use a different camera. You use basically a heat camera. Can you talk about that? For problem? That has to do with energy, I suppose. No, it's energy is a question.
Yeah, with this specific film, when we started experimenting with thermal cameras, we had these guys at NASA who were creating these cameras for us, and I just thought they were beautiful. I just love the colors. I've always been obsessed with color. I always like the idea of, that's why I love John McCracken or something. I just love the idea of images carved of color, and these obviously thermal is reacts to they're heat-based and form and light, and so it's really capturing like kind of souls, and I thought it was something nice about that, and it's also very much on the line between like abstraction and you know, there's like figurative abstract, and it kind of bleeds into like total abstraction, depending on where you are, where the camera is, where the light is. There was something kind of like, you know, and I also knew that it would be provocative, and that the people would have to sit through, you know, something that length that, you know, it's like you would have to retrain your eyes in some ways. So for me, it was just beautiful.
Now in Miami, you know, there is your Edgelord studio, which we discussed and which you described beautifully. But then there is also a kind of a studio where, because obviously lots of people in that studio, it's really packed, you know, it's very, very dense.
Yeah.
Super, like full of energy. I felt energized like for weeks. Like I'm back.
It's intense. Yeah. When I leave the rooms, I have to go stare out at the water to know that the world is real.
And then you go fishing sometimes.
I go fishing just to touch a fish, because I need to understand that the world is real. Otherwise, there is no reality without a fish.
There's no reality without a fish. But then there is the reality of your second studio, which is, you know, where you're kind of alone. And in that second studio, you do the paintings, but there is also your archive. There are kind of two things in that studio. There are these magical boxes, which I will also discuss. Magical boxes, but then there are the paintings, which you can see here. Can you talk a little bit about how the film kind of leads into painting? Because it's kind of for the first time, because you used to have always a film practice, and then you used to have an art studio. I mean, remember in Paris, you know, my partner Couchonga had a studio in the same building of Agnès B, where you had the studio and you made drawings there. It was an art practice, but then a film practice. And here, like for the first time, you bring these two things together. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's the first time I think they ever. I think the first time in all my career where they kind of where the paintings are taken from source material or something directly from the images come directly from I'm calling it a film, but from the movie. But yeah, I have a painting studio that's the exact opposite. It's actually just 2 blocks over, and it's actually the opposite of the Edgelord's office space. Because it's just like me in a room. And these are pretty much, and I kind of like, the film itself is pretty complicated in the way that it was made, and, you know, technically it's kind of complex, and the paintings are very simple. I was just really like, is there a way to like make kind of like a classic painting, a two-dimensional rendering just using oil and canvas of the kind of like thermal world, kind of like dystopian kind of landscape. So it was a lot of just about colors and trial and error and things. But I have both. I usually go to the studio. I usually go to Edgelord in the day, and at night, when my kids go to sleep, I'll go to the studio and paint.
And in a way, they kind of grew. I mean, they're very radiating, these paintings. I mean, Blondie, there's a Blondie song, no, Fade Away and Radiate. They're very radiating.
Yeah.
But also, your previous series, you know, because I saw these previous series of paintings, and there's a great conversation between you and Rita Ackermann, your friend, the artist, where you kind of say that already these previous series with the teddies, you know, these teddy bear paintings, you tried to kind of make them radiate. So can we say that kind of these radiating paintings grew out of the previous radiating paintings?
I just love color, and I love seeing how far you can push color. I love sun. That's why I live in Florida. It just makes me happy. It's just like one of those things. It's like, I lived in London, I love London, but it made me sad. and I couldn't figure out why I was so sad. I was here for like years. And I was like, whoa, it gets dark a lot, very early, and it rains a lot. And then I was like, then I realized that I really kind of am like my happiness is a lot defined by the weather and the sun and colors. It's just a thing for me.
But the previous paintings, these teddy bears had to do with Cleve Dean, or with the wrestler.
Oh yeah.
And at the same time,
Cleve Dean.
Yeah, Cleve Dean, and there's also that kind of thing with, it's connected somehow also to golf, and you mentioned presidents play golf, and then you mentioned why many golfers kind of sleep with teddy bears. It's kind of complicated.
Yeah, well, I never really understood why presidents golf. Why do they all just golf? So I did a series of presidents playing golf. I made a bunch of paintings. I forget though how it tied in. I am a fan of arm wrestling, like a competitive arm wrestling. And my hero is this guy, his name's Cleve Dean. He's dead now, but he was like a 500-pound redneck. And he could like pick up like 6 or 7 sheep and throw them over his shoulder. And unbelievable. He wear like overalls. And I think maybe what we were talking about is that he looked like a teddy bear. I don't know. But anyway, this guy, you got to look him up. Cleve Dean, unbelievable. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records.
So my friend Ette Laran always said, she wanted to kind of paint energy. and energy, obviously with painting, the future is also sometimes invented with fragments from the past. So I was kind of wondering in terms of painting, because we look at your paintings, who are the kind of painters from the past who inspire you? Because you mention Kippenberger quite often, but you also mention an artist whom we see very little these days, but who is incredibly important, Erwin Fahlström, as a huge influence. Can you tell us about that?
I just love the works, the collages, the works in different mediums, the color. He's kind of a really ignored artist, but he was. I know Mike Kelly loved him. He's a really great Erwin Fahlström, really awesome artist. Other artists, who else is good? Who's the guy Spock in Star Trek? He made some good ones. I'd like to keep all my influences secret.
And there is something about William Ecclestone, because Jürgen Teller told me you went on a road trip.
Yeah. Eggleston, yeah.
The colors, no?
William Eggleston. I grew up in Tennessee, and Eggleston's from Memphis, so I was always pretty friendly with him, and we did a road. Jürgen Teller and I did a road trip with Eggleston through Memphis. We did a book of all the photographs on that trip. It was pretty wild. It was good.
And then there's a kind of a little-known series of painting of yours, which is also just preceding this one a few years earlier. And they've never really been exhibited, but you worked on them for quite some time, and that's the series of the boats.
I got to show those at some point. They were porn boats.
An unrealized exhibition, right?
Yeah. They were watercolors. They were big boats of yachts and big paintings of yachts, a lot of watercolors, some oil. But they were really painted in a very classical way, but they just had like porn titles, so it would be like, because I live around, you see boats all day and they have these stupid names, so it would just be like, I don't know if I could say, anyway, they have porno names, let's put it that way, but they're pretty funny.
Well, that's an unrealized exhibition.
One day I'll Schindler's Fist.
We're going to talk about more unrealized projects at the end. So that's an unrealized exhibition. Now, to come back to the show here, there is a kind of a focus in these paintings also on details, which I wasn't really aware before, but today when I saw the show, there is basically a focus on hands and gestures. It's almost like zooming in. Can you talk about that?
That's a hand of a stripper. She's one of my favorite strippers. What is the question? You just want to know why it's clever?
Yeah, the sort of focus on that you sort of have details, no? All of a sudden you zoom in.
Definitely different details. Yeah, with this camera.
And then images somehow break down. You say that with these paintings, but also with the film, you're attracted in bringing an image to the point where it starts to break down. So then the figures have another kind of quality. They're almost like ghosts, no?
Yeah, I always loved that. I always loved to try to push things to see where images. I always liked the idea of trying to find the breaking point of images, in all the films, and the mix of high and low, and kind of like when an image starts out clean, and how far you can push it before it disintegrates. Because I think like as it goes, it has different meaning, basically. So like as the image dissolves, it means different things. So you start off with a clean image, and it means one thing. And then you degrade the image a little bit, and then it maybe means something else. And then you go to like a 4th, 5th, and 6th level of degradation, and then it starts to like actually become something that was happy becomes sad or romantic or bizarre, or so a lot of it has to do with detail and light and grain structure, and it's something I'm always exploring.
And the whole thing, I mean, one sees it here in the show with the paintings, but it's also true for the film, is almost completely underwater, and you've always loved the ocean, as you told me, and you literally live on the ocean, literally a few centimeters away from the ocean. And there was always this idea, actually, of living on a boat, and I think that's the most recent painting. Yeah,
that one I just finished. But I love the ocean. I really probably I'd be happy just to spend my whole life like on a boat somewhere. It doesn't even have to be like a big boat, just like a rowboat. I love being by the ocean. It's like my favorite thing.
Another thing which came to my mind looking at the film is kind of rituals, no? And Tarkovsky, the director, famously said, that we live in a society where rituals disappear. We need to kind of think about rituals. And recently there's been this very beautiful book by the Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han, who talks about the fact that it even happens more in the digital age, it's sort of disappearance of rituals. And rituals have always played a big role. I mean, if I think about Trash Humpers, in 2009, it's a film of very strange rituals, and that's also the case here. Can you talk about that?
I think like rituals also, but it's also, I think things become ritualistic when a lot of the worlds, those films and the images, they kind of are in what I would call like the world of vapors, where you have these kind of like a culture, or you have a geography or people where they're reduced to their most base. It's almost like what happens when there's just no God, when there's just no faith, when it's all just evaporated. And you're just left with like the vapors of, like in this case, you're left with like the vapors of humanity. And there's like beauty in it also. It's not always like, so rituals, I guess, like you'll see like rituals within that world. But a lot of it is like it's the vapors.
I mean, that could almost be a great conclusion. I do have two last questions. One is, I think it would be great for everyone to hear a little bit more about what's going to happen tomorrow between 8 p.m. and late.
Oh yeah, we're going to do this thing tomorrow. It's like an event. I guess like close to like a rave or something, but it's an experience. Like I'm not really, we're like playing around with the idea of like showing the films and presenting it in like different contexts. We just did a strip club in LA, and like we'll go to like different places, and it's more of like an experience. But they're going to screen the film. I think it's in Hackney, and then tomorrow, and then in a different way. It's not like a regular projection. And then it will devolve into like a party or like music and like closer like DJs and stuff. It'll be fun. Tomorrow's gonna be fun. You should all come. Take some Molly.
Arca is gonna perform.
Percocet. Molly Percocet.
There's a whole great lineup.
Rep the set. Molly Percocet. Yeah, it'll be like that tomorrow.
What's next? You mentioned this morning your next film, Home Invasion.
The next one, I won't talk too much about it, but it's pretty wild. It's completely different than this, but it really goes into like I don't know if I should talk too much about it, but it's they're not really actors, they're avatars in the film. It's all shot with security cameras and GoPros, and there's no cinema. It's very much like being inside of a FPS. It's very much from like that perspective, but then it goes into like a whole, becomes like a game. We'll say like, we'll put that. I've never made anything like it before. Pretty wild shit.
And you said also that, I mean, basically we're at a moment of incredible transformation, and you said, you know, because obviously the film we see here and tomorrow has only not even been out for a year. And you said there have been a total quantum leap since then in terms of the technology and what.
Yeah, I mean, just the technology from when this film, we started working on this over a year ago, and then from today it's like a completely different technology. And within 2 years it'll be completely, it'll be totally different as well. Within 5 years, I don't think you'll really be able to like recognize a lot of what's going on now. The truth is, like, we're all just fucked, so you gotta have fun. You have to like, you need to like enjoy it. It's like fun. You gotta like have, play around with it all.
Last question is the only recurrent question as you know, because I've asked you many times before, in all the interviews, a question about the unrealized projects. And we know a great deal about architects' unrealized projects because they publish them all the time, but we know relatively little about artists' unrealized projects. And the sort of range of unrealized projects can be pretty wide. It can be projects which have been too expensive or too big to be realized or too small to be realized or maybe too time intense. Sometimes there's just not enough time. Or utopic projects or dreams. Can also be censored projects. Censorship can be a reason. Or as Doris Lessing, whom I often saw here in London before her passing the Nobel Prize of Literature, Doris Lessing, she always said, there's also the projects, we want to do, but we don't dare to do. That's kind of, she called those the self-censor projects. So within this whole range, of the unbuilt, can you tell us about one or two of your favorite unrealized projects?
I mean, I always wanted to adapt the phone book. That's my biggest one. I have so many others. I have so many things I've never been able to do. Life isn't. I get angry at myself because there's so many. But I've made a lot of things, but I feel like I barely made anything, and like I feel like there's so much that I haven't done that like I want to do. So I have so many. I have an unrealized project every day, an unrealized dream or something. It's hard to keep track. But you do the best you can. What are you going to do, right?
There's also something with Brazil, because there's an amazing, situation with art in Brazil right now. We did this project with Gabriel Massan last year at the Serpentine, and there's a whole amazing new generation. You mentioned last time you want to do something in Brazil.
Yeah, we have a lot of Brazilians work at Edgelord, and they put like a satellite studio in a favela there. It's coming up with some of the wildest shit.
Then there is also a book you wanted to do about commercial failures. Because we haven't talked about your work in advertising.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, a lot of film history happened with advertising. I mean, the famous Barilli movies, advertising from Fellini. And you make great pieces for advertising. There's a kind of a book about commercial failures.
Yeah, I love it. I do a lot of advertising, a lot of advertising, but fashion and stuff. But I've done like all types of advertising, and I actually love advertising because it's like it's not emotional. It's not like it's more of like it's a place where like I can like play around with ideas and I can work with different people that I like this guy. Let me try to do this. I'm going to do an Oreo cookies commercial. It's like, well, maybe we get this guy, and then I can I've developed a lot of my ideas. A lot of the things came from commercial work, but I had this idea. I think you're talking about. Yes, I was going to write a book called Commercial Failures, and it was just all the commercials that were never made, that failed, because I would throw out crazy ideas. They would come to you, and they'd be like, "You can do whatever you want. You're going to advertise for blah, 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 and you can give me your," and then I would say, "Really?" They'd be like, "Yeah," and then I would come at them with this idea, and they'd be like, "Hell no." And then basically I spent 5 years just being coming up with ideas that were never used, and I kept most of them. I've written them down. And, I mean, I understand why some of them.
Yeah, and in your studio, in the painting studio, there's not only the paintings, but there are also these magical boxes from your early fanzines with lists of unrealized projects.
Yeah, archives. Yeah, I have archives just filled with unrealized projects, and just things. They're just writings and notes and drawings and pictures. But it's pretty daunting. It's hard for me to look at them. There's so much.
And then there was this movie, The Trap, and that could have become a video game.
Yeah, but we're talking about making The Trap now as an anime, so
Wow.
you heard it here first.
And that's a great way to conclude with this announcement. Thank you so much, Harmony. Thank you so much.
Thank you.